Panmyth, City of the Lost, Strange Shores. Chapter 3. A Kind of Magic. If you see the magic in a fairy tale, you can face the future. Daniel Steele. They entered the room, the same three from the shipwrecked shore, still clad in white hooded robes, cassocks, and peculiar gas masks. Sam's head was beginning to clear now, and they looked less distorted than from before. Their leader was unmistakably female. The other two were masculine, but the male to Sam's right was huge, for he stood over 6 foot and about half as wide. The leader of this troop pulled back her hood and mask to reveal a hardened but attractive face. Her smooth skin was a light shade of olive and sported multiple piercings. Her colorful short hair was swept over to the right, exposing a crew cut that was shaved in an artful chevron pattern that wrapped around the left side of her skull. As the two men began to pull off their own hoods and masks, the woman pulled off her gloves, revealing a mechanical left arm and hand, with which she pulled out and opened up a wallet. She compared the photo ID with the bedridden man. While he was not model material, his face was easy enough on the eyes and had a rugged appeal. In a slight Grecian accent, she read from the ID, "Samuel Nemo Faust?" Sam blinked several times. Then, in a parched voice, he said, "Yes, that is my name. Where am?" The woman interrupted. "Born in 1921, Manhattan, New York?" Sam replied, "Yeah, that is when I was born, but—" And at that moment, Sam recoiled in terror, for after removing his mask, the towering male's face was hideously exaggerated, blue-skinned, tusked, black-horned, and sporting a wild mane of orange hair. Strapped over his left eye was a mechanical monocle. Upon seeing this reaction, the creature sighed with the annoyance of ennui. Sam whipped his head to the left to avoid looking at the monstrosity, but only to see the second smaller male with his own mask removed. It revealed a tattooed angelic face, long silken platinum hair, and severely pierced, pointed ears. Sam was shocked into silence. The blue-skinned demon chuckled in a gruff voice. "Hey, Xavier, I think you frightened him." The pale-skinned beauty threw his glove at the monstrosity's face and said, "Oh, shut up, Frank." However, Xavier began to chuckle lightly with the slightest of smiles. Xavier turned to the woman and said, "Alex, perhaps I should take Papa Smurf here to take care of some of our other guests." Frank gave Xavier a dirty look, but then responded with a sharp-toothed smile. Alex, thinking it over, smirked and said with a harumph, "That might be a good idea, Xavier. In fact, I want you to go to Ward 5 and check on our patient in room 3. He should be recovering soon." Xavier groaned. "Ugh, that one is a nasty piece of work. I'll be glad to get rid of him." Cracking his knuckles with a snarl, Frank piped in, "I would love to get rid of him, in more ways than one." Angrily, Alex snapped, "Frank, that is not our way as siblings of mercy." Frank put his hands up defensively. Hey, Alex, it was just a joke. I wouldn't harm a fly, and you know it." With casual dismissiveness, he waved his hand in the air and rolled his eyes while saying, "Him, on the other hand, I'm willing to make an exception." Alex sighed and rubbed a weary forehead. Xavier pulled Frank by the ear and said, "Come on, hon, we got our work cut out for us. Let our lady captain finish up with our guest here." He pulled Frank out the door while Frank kept saying, "Ow, ow, ow, not so rough. You know they're sensitive. No fair, Xavier." The door closed behind them. Alex blew some of the strands of hair away from her face and shook her head. "Now, where were we? Oh, yes. Your name is Samuel Nemo Faust of Manhattan, New York, born 1921. Is that correct?" Sam nodded and began to open his mouth to ask a question. However, Alex continued, "From your various IDs, they say that you are a licensed private detective and a former police officer?" Blinking in confusion, Sam said, "Yeah, was on the force for 5 years, last of which I achieved detective." But then it was decided it would be best if I went into the private sector. Mechanical hand on hip, she asked. Now, if I undo your restraints, are you going to cause me any trouble? Disarmed by her candor, and with a tired smile, Sam said, No, ma'am. I promise no monkey business. As Alex began to undo a wrist restraint, she asked, So, Mr. Faust. Please, just Sam will do. Well, Sam, I'm pleased to meet you. I am Alexandria Polymusha of Sparta. While I have seen many victims affected by the mist madness, you took the cake. After releasing his first restraint, she began on the second and said, The madness comes from exposure to the mist that surrounds the island. No one knows why it causes it, but those who are exposed to too much of it, well, they go schizo for a short time. Schizo? That means you went mad. I see. And that's why I was so confused and disoriented coming to shore. Releasing the second wrist restraint, she moved to his ankles and said, You got it. And it makes the victim especially dangerous as it removes all inhibitions, invokes primal emotions such as rage, lust, fear, you name it. To top it off, it heightens strength and endurance to pain, sort of like someone on PCP. We refer to it as the rapture. Usually after removing the victim from exposure, the side effects go away after 24 hours. But you have been going all out for 3 days. Sam's eyes opened in disbelief and said, Bourgeois. Confusedly rebuke, Alex hummed an affirmative and said, Never seen that happen before. Even when you were unconscious, you were gibbering and even screaming about a monster in your sleep. We were afraid the madness wasn't entirely from the mist, hence the restraints. Sam frowned at this comment. She undid his last restraint, and he shakily sat up in bed, and while he rubbed his wrist, said, I'm more or less sane. I've never been to the Laughing House, but, well, I guess you could say I've lived an interesting life. Alex leaned her butt against one of the laundry baskets, crossed her arms, and unconvincingly said, I guess so. So, Blue Bruno, he is an Oni? A confused look of surprise danced across Alex's face. Why, yes, Frank is indeed Oni. She looked at his wallet again, tossed it to him, and with a raised eyebrow said, Now I'm the one confused. From the era you were born, and your obvious reaction, I assumed you didn't know such beings existed. Like I said, I've lived an interesting life. I have heard of Oni, but it was rare to come across one until now. I was just shocked by his appearance and wasn't prepared. What did you mean by the era I was born? Well, Sam, that's a little harder to explain because you're in the no place of the nowhere during the no when. The no what now? Well, first off, you are safe, for now. You're in one of the safe houses of the Siblings of Mercy. It's our job and calling to rescue washups like yourself and get them oriented and registered here in Panmyth. Pan what? Panmyth. It is the island city that rests within a paradoxical dimension beyond time and space. It's where all lost and forgotten things eventually end up. Sam raised an eyebrow to this and said, Okay. Alex sighed and said, Imagine a pocket of reality that's connected yet separate from the realities we normally know. It is an island surrounded by what some call a barrier of temporal mist. Both beings and things wash up from different eras and even alternative lines. Time here virtually stands still, and no one seems to age or even die from old age. So, does that mean I'm basically immortal now? Don't let that fool you. You can still die, because it's a harsh city out there. Plenty of people and things to do you, kill you, rip you off, everything. In fact, many just drown when they wash up into Panmyth. That is why the siblings exist, to try and rescue wash-ups from drowning or from worse fates. What are the siblings exactly? Well, that would take a while to explain. But in short, the organization has a long and rich history which is respected by most in the city. It was started long ago by an alternative Sybil Dorset, the voice of many. Back in the early history of Panmyth, she rescued many wash-ups like yourself. And soon after, people followed her lead, and thus the Siblings of Mercy was born. Sam frowned and said, This all sounds a little too screwy to me, and I've seen my share of the fantastic. Like I said, I've lived an interesting life. Oh, believe me, it's about to get more interesting. Sam sarcastically replied, Swell. So, When I said time seems to stand still here, I was telling the truth. But it also progresses like it does on Earth. Scholars argue about it constantly, but Panmyth time keeps up with Earth time. No one is absolutely sure because of Earth's last great cataclysm, but it's estimated that the year is circa 2020-30. How was that worked out? Well, nothing seems to wash in from different eras past that date. We know this as we still have a connection to the still active Aethernet, but no outside activity has happened since. The Aether what now? Considering the era you are from, that is even harder to explain, because technology and magic here is more advanced than the early 20th century. You make it sound commonplace. Back in my time, magic was rare and dying out because no one seriously believed in it. I did, but then again, that was because I lived an interesting life. Again, Alex was surprised at this statement and asked, "You mean you actually believe in magic?" Well, sure. In fact, I can cast a bit of magic, but I'm not very good at it. I'm intrigued. Can you show me what you can do? Sam let out a puff of air and said, "Well, I can try some illusion magic. But, well, I'm a novice at best and was only taught a little bit." Sam held out his palms as if he were holding a cup. Quickly, he folded his fingers into and out of one another, as if he were playing the children's game Cat's Cradle, but without the yarn. His hands then snapped back to the cup hold, and he concentrated so hard that sweat beaded across his brow. For a few seconds, nothing happened, but then a glowing green orb appeared between his hands. The light floated up into the air and exploded into micro-fireworks. Exhausted, Sam fell heavily back onto his pillow. See, I am no good. Alex's face, however, was lit with excitement. She exclaimed, "Sam, that was very impressive, for a wash-up human of your era, I mean. Not only that, you were performing Weaver style. That is an ancient style that is not used much these days except by the CEOs or the antediluvian wash-ups." Exhausted, but certainly surprised and flattered, Sam replied, "Really? I had no idea it was that special." "Yes, really. Now then, who taught you that?" As he twisted a ring back and forth on his left hand, Sam winced. "I'd rather not go into that, if you don't mind." Alex frowned with concern and said, "Very well, I will respect your wishes. However, I should have used better judgment and shouldn't have asked for a magic demo. It has been at least 3 days since you have eaten or had any water. You were so violent we couldn't even get you on an IV drip." From under her robes, she pulled out a canteen and handed it to him. "Here, drink up, but slowly, okay? I'll be right back with some food." Weakly, Sam said, "Thanks, Dollface." Alex left the room. As Sam sipped slowly from the canteen, he began to study his palm. When Alex arrived 10 minutes later, she found that Sam was fast asleep, the canteen still in his hand. She placed the platter of food on the nightstand by his bed, covered him up, and then took the canteen out of his hand. But as she did so, she noticed something curious. In the center of each of his palms were scar marks that formed a strange, curvy star.